Ladies and gentlemen, this session will be held by Dr. Amit Malik, founder and CEO, Amaha. Please welcome with a huge round of applause.
Hi, I've got a 10-15 minute window before lunch, so I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible so that I don't spoil your mental health anymore. But I'm a psychiatrist by background. I don't usually tell people that at the start of a conversation. Last 3 years, I've been doing this for 25 years now, right? I've been a psychiatrist for a very long time, and I have never seen anything as fascinating as the dynamic in the last 3-4 years. It's just, the landscape has changed beyond what most people don't recognize at an individual level. So I don't know organizations as well as you guys do, but at an individual level, we see about 4,000 to 5,000 patients in a month, and the dynamic has changed completely in the last 3.5 years in every way, right? In terms of expectation of oneself, of one's ecosystem, about what really works and what doesn't work for an individual and the family, that whole dynamic is changed. So, and you know, I can sit and give a long lecture about some of this stuff, but I won't. I'll just skip to some of these slides, but really stick to some main points in the conversation, right? Hopefully this will work, right? I've heard some fascinating debates today about whether remote working works or not. And you know, we have a team of about 160 clinicians that work at Amaha, and I often tell them that the client, the patient will decide what works for them. I think in this case as well, employees are going to make that choice, and I think it's going to be probably a mix of both things. It's going to be a mix of some remote, some in the office. The hybrid work is what's going to happen, right? And some stats that I'm not going to bore you with because you guys do this for a living and know this better than me, right? But the narratives are conflicting. What causes distress, right? What causes distress is that, oh, it's really good, no, but it's really bad. Right? So the hybrid work is fantastic, but no, it's actually terrible. And that conflicting conversation is what causes distress at individual level. And you go to marginalized groups at the workplace, if somebody with a disability, somebody from a minority space, that becomes even exponentially worse. So how do you actually understand fully and have an open conversation for your organization about, at an employee level, what works, what doesn't work, right? So we know these. I'm not going to spend time on what the pros and cons are, but we have to come on one side of this conversation or the other, right? Because if we almost sit on the fence, that is the fundamental reason for isolation for lots of, especially remote workers and hybrid workers, essentially, because they see themselves very differently. And again, we know what the challenges for organizations are, right? We get wider talent pools. I run a hybrid organization. My team is much smaller than most people have. We have about 300 people on the team, right? But we run a hybrid team. And do we offer the same opportunities to somebody who's remote or hybrid, to somebody who's full-time in the office? Do we understand that? And that, if I just take the core of what the problem is that cycle. It's basically saying, am I getting the same recognition for the same work, right? Does that lead to my chances of growth? Are they affected by that context? And how does that affect my morale and my sense of purpose in the organization, right? And me feeling part of the organization. Now, if the constant messaging is the guys who come to office or the people who come to office are better, then that is going to cause distress for a lot of your workforce that is not coming to office every day. And actually, also for people who are coming to office every day, they might feel hard done by. So actually making that decision, and it might be right for different organizations, right? Or wrong for different organizations. So if you work in the healthcare sector, our clinicians, a lot of them have to be on the ground. There's no, and that's the work, that's the nature of the work, right? So it's definitely not one size fits all. Making that decision explicitly as an organization and then communicating that explicitly becomes critically important. That's what I was going to say. It's a decision, it's a choice. I think, and are we making the choice explicitly, or are we just falling into patterns of acceptance in different teams, in different parts of the organization and different hierarchy levels? Or are we making a conscious choice as an organization? Because this language, right, when you see these ads put out for jobs, one of the things is that, I'll just come back to that, is saying, I'll come back, it's a perk, right? Hybrid is a perk, basically. It's not a perk, it's a strategic choice. It has to work for the organization. We have to be convinced that it's a great thing, or no, it doesn't work for our sector or our organization at all, and then hire accordingly. Because otherwise, you're doing disservice to yourself and to the people you're hiring, essentially. And so we are very clear, for some roles, we will not hire remote, or not hire hybrid. For some roles, we are absolutely hiring fully remote. Right? But that communication is right at the outset, saying this is the nature of the role. It's not a perk or a benefit. So that once you put something as a perk, by definition, you're saying we're doing you a favor. And that in itself puts somebody at a psychological disadvantage. Right? So how do you manage that part, right? Now, I'm just going to leave you with some hygiene steps. Please forgive me if you guys are already all doing it. But I said, first of all, assess this, right? I said, assess proactively for your organization what your employees want, what the business data is showing about what works and doesn't work, and what the organization goals are. As I said, all three have to align. And if you get into a situation where you're just going by what your employees want, but that doesn't align, it doesn't work. Or the other way around. So I think all these three things have to align to actually make a decision consciously and say, okay, we are okay to be a hybrid organization. And the second part is really saying, based on that decision, then craft your policy. Right? It has to be a conscious choice. And again, a lot of you have already done it. I've seen tons of policies. We work with over 100 organizations right now. I've seen tons of these policies. A lot of them are cut and paste of other policies from other organizations. Some of them are not even Indian. And so for you as an organization might be very different because of your sector, because of your geographical location, because of your workforce mix. So actually, again, based on that first start of making that conscious choice, then crafting the policy based on that's quite important, right? Again, might not apply to everybody. There's no way our housekeeping and front desk staff can work remotely. Just not the nature of the job, right? So how do you actually make this conscious call saying, okay, this team is always going to be fully physical, this team can be hybrid, this team is fully remote, and making that explicit so that actually anybody who comes in the role understands that is the nature of the job and not a favor to them or a disservice to them, essentially. And then establishing work schedules very transparently. I think lack of transparency is what causes a lot of distress to people. When people are sitting there thinking, am I just being seen differently because I've just not gone to office for the last 2 weeks? Or I think that transparency and establishing schedules, making them transparent for people, establishing that these roles are remote, because you can't get equality here. You got to get equity here. You got to get equity in a business context. That's what you're looking for. So establishing those schedules is very, very important. So again, do the analysis on the first part, draft the policy based on that, and then beyond that, then be consistent with it, right? And consistent in multiple ways, right? And I think the leadership language, the language leaders use within the organization about remote working, about hybrid working, about the meaning of that, about the language people use, what messaging we send by our actions with promotions, with bonuses, all that becomes very, very important in fostering a healthy culture and becomes very important in having healthy employees from well-being perspective, right? So as I said, championing example setting by leaders, establishing communication channels, right? And I would go a step further and say establishing communication guidelines, right? Is it okay to have a routine call set up on a Friday evening at 8 o'clock? And is that the expectation that should be in the organization? Somebody from A&M was sitting here. Yes, if you have a client pressure and that's the nature of the work, then obviously that's going to happen, right? So actually, whatever works for your sector, but making that explicit so that people aren't just left guessing from a communication perspective. And this, I'm sure everybody does very well, but just putting there for completion's sake, how do you still get people together, right? Because that human connection, somebody was saying, is very, very important. It's important in schools. I have a 10-year-old, and he didn't enjoy hybrid either, or remote either during COVID. So how do you foster that human connection in a very intentional and thoughtful way? Right? Which teams are interacting with which teams? Where are they interacting? What are they setting? Getting everybody out for a sort of massive boost session might not be the best answer for many teams. So just being more intentional and thoughtful about how we're doing it. And then making it very transparent that this is new for all of us. We will learn. Because what happens is once something gets set, we will always find it very hard to reverse it. So how do you actually make it transparent and say, guys, this is the policy. We will review it in 6 months or a year. And reiterating that message. Because when you say it at the time of the policy launch, people hear it and forget it very easily because it works for them to forget it. So how do you actually keep reiterating the message that we are reviewing the data, we're reviewing the information, we're reviewing the feedback, we're reviewing business data, and we'll keep reviewing what we're doing. So I think that's the third part, is how do you foster the culture around, so you made the decisions, you set the rules, then you're implementing them with the culture and connection, right? And that's the whole, that's a cycle, right? You constantly have that cycle. Now, for us as an organization, I mean, just do a plug here for a minute, right? So we are a mental health and behavioral health organization. We literally focus on emotional well-being, and that's all we do. We are a 300 people team just focusing on that, right? And saying everything from how to assess organizational mental health and well-being, how do you then deliver care based on what the assessment is in terms of group interventions, individual interventions. We have a 50,000 member support community. How do you leverage that? A lot of the stuff that happens as standard in the industry around workshops, webinars, all that stuff, obviously. And then how do you build campaigns around awareness building? A lot of this is around saying, how do you communicate expectations bilaterally on emotional well-being, right? Okay, what do we expect as a team, as an organization, and what does the employee expect? How do we have that bilateral conversation? And how do we then give them channels? Because this whole idea of building a model like this is saying you got to meet the team member where they are. Somebody might be willing to go and see somebody in a clinic or face-to-face in a session. Somebody might want to just do work on themselves, right? So wherever they are in the journey, how do you understand them better? And then how do you meet their needs better? That's the whole idea of what we do, right? So, and again, one of the things we keep harping on about, and we feel very strongly about, is saying, if you don't equip your leaders with the right skills, you'll always struggle and figure out why programs are not working. Because, I mean, there's recent data that came out that your manager impacts your mental health more than anybody else in the world, right, including a spouse. So how, if you need to figure out how that manager is equipped to support signpost emotional well-being, that becomes very, very important, right? And then, again, having multiple touch points, online, offline, with different people, doing targeted interventions, right? For example, running a program for returning mothers to the workforce, right? Or a Gen Z specific program. How do you run specific programs for specific workforces? Because you can't have the same conversation with such demographically diverse groups and cohorts, especially in large organizations. So you have to understand different challenges. You have to then customize your programs to specific cohorts and then run it for them, essentially, right? Even financial wellness, right? We were having this interesting conversation yesterday. A financial wellness conversation for a 60-year-old close to retirement is very different from a 21-year-old. So how do you then, but a lot of organizations run the same program, or for everybody, right? How do you then customize programs and then run them? And so similar thing applies here for mental wellness. So that's it. I'm going to stop. I'm over 1.5 minutes over. This is about people. You guys are experts at people, so I'm not going to even try and teach you how to suck eggs. This is about people. What I can tell you is that it's created a lot of ecosystem anxiety in the last 3 years. We are seeing 10x the number of people we used to see pre-COVID, right? Our clinical team was 7 people pre-COVID. We are 150 people right now. So that's I'm saying that, and a lot of the stuff comes from people who are in the workforce. There, 33% or 1/3 of the population we see from employed workforce has relationship issues in the romantic context. So they're significant partner, and they bring that to the workplace. They bring that happens there. So actually, every time you think about policies, it's about people. It's about the fact that those lives are not separate anymore, the personal and professional, and we end up dealing with lots of those personal issues when employees come to us for support within a workplace context, right? I can't reiterate this. I mean, we went from employee satisfaction to culture, and I think now it's well-being, right? That's how at least I've seen the journey in the last 20 years. I think right now, we talked about purpose, we talked about mission, but I think there's a lot of value that individuals and families are placing on their well-being today, even in India, right? Where, I mean, it's obviously happening in the US, but even in India, we're seeing that. And so how do you foster a culture that enables and recognizes that? I mean, this is obvious, but resources not just in terms of mental well-being, which you just talked about, but also tools that allow them to engage better, engage real time, have equal conversations. Something as simple as when you do a hybrid meeting, do you call on the remote person first or last? When are you calling on them to contribute? It's just simple tools. Equipping your managers with that, your leaders with that, really changes the dynamic of the conversation and sends signaling, soft signaling to the whole organization, essentially. We've talked about this enough, and then I would reiterate, nobody knows. I mean, people will talk about it, and all the profs in the US are churning out data day on day, and their debates on productivity going up, going down. All I'd say is that I've been doing science-based well-being and mental wellness for the last 25 years. It's still too early to pronounce judgment. We've only been in for 3 years. So that's why, and it's definitely early to pronounce judgment at an academic and intellectual level, but it's even more difficult to pronounce judgment at an organization level because organizations are so different. So how do you keep evaluating on business data, on org goals, on people feedback, and relearning and learning collaboratively? I think that's going to be key to success.